It appears that 9 corporate House Democrats are threatening to tank the $3.5 trillion reconciliation package unless they get their demands. Now, what are their demands? Well, according to CNN, these so-called moderates or conservative Democrats recently sent a letter to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi demanding that she give not the reconciliation package, but the bipartisan infrastructure package a vote first in the House. They said, quote, "We will not consider voting for a budget resolution until the bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passes the House and is signed into law." The letter to Pelosi said. That letter, of course, was led by Representative Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey, the co-chairman of the bipartisan, quote-unquote, Problem Solvers Caucus, which, let's be honest, they seem to be causing more problems than solving, okay? And so they're a front for large corporate donors. Those of you who are not familiar, of course, with those groups, along with Third Way. Now, the letter is signed by Representatives Gottheimer, Vicente Gonzalez of Texas, Philemon Vela of Texas, Jared Golden of Maine, Ed Case of Hawaii, Kurt Schrader of Oregon, and Henry Cuellar of Texas, as well as Jim Costa of California and Carolyn Boudreaux of Georgia. So now, one name that really stuck out for me was Henry Cuellar. Henry Cuellar is one of, if not, the most corrupt Democrat in the House. So now, Cuellar's top contributor, by the way, is the oil and gas sector. According to OpenSecrets.com, he received about $219,782 in campaign donations or legalized bribes, essentially, from oil and gas. So Cuellar, and keep that in mind, by the way, that figure is statistically significant because Cuellar has teamed up with these other so-called moderates, and basically they're going to do what the donors tell them to do. And what the donors want is the bipartisan bill, which was crafted around not only Republicans, but of course to appeal to corporate Democrats. So there's a lot of giveaways to corporations and oil and gas. And of course, they leave out a lot of the really important human infrastructure, as well as, well, stuff dealing with climate change. So that's really important. So, and by the way, physical infrastructure is incredibly popular among the business class because guess who uses that physical infrastructure the most? Corporations. So we have a lot of investments in that bipartisan bill that would do a lot of, again, investment in the oil and gas industry. So now, I mentioned climate change being left out of the bipartisan bill. So now, you all heard about the IPCC report. I talked about it on the show. That report is described by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres as a, quote, code red for humanity. He said in a statement, "The alarm bells are deafening. The report must sound a death knell for coal and fossil fuels before they destroy this planet." So now, the bipartisan bill, as I said, leaves that out, but the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill, crafted by House, Senate progressives, with Chairman Bernie Sanders leading the way. And by the way, this is smaller than what Chairman Sanders had actually originally came up with, but they settled on $3.5 trillion, which is a pretty significant amount of money. So now it's pretty serious, right? So now back to the bipartisan bill. That includes provisions called asset recycling. Now, that's a fancy way of saying we're going to privatize. We're going to sell off public infrastructure to private corporations who will then control and monetize it to the end of time. Meaning toll roads for people who had already paid for those roads through their taxes doesn't matter. There you go. Now, again, there's a lot of bad stuff in the bill. There's some good things as well. They are, of course, doing some investments in drinking water infrastructure, including $10 billion to address PFAS substances. That's the polyfluoroalkyl substance. I apologize. I'm not really good at saying that stuff. And of course, there's investments in broadband, $42.5 billion for broadband equity access and deployment. and $16 billion for energy efficiency and renewable energy, and also appropriates about $15 billion to replace lead pipes. So now I point that out because that's literally what's in the bill. And so I want to be honest about representing what is in, because a lot of us focus on the bad, and there is a lot of bad. As I said, asset recycling is awful. It's a ridiculous idea. But there's also some good things in it. Okay. Now, that said, I'm going to go into my criticism here and say that this is not enough. Obviously, on lead pipes alone, replacing all of them would actually cost, with estimates ranging up to about $60 billion, according to the American Water Works Association. So there's a lot of stuff there's a lot of spending that needs to happen, which is why it's so incredibly important to pass the $3.5 trillion reconciliation package that does not require Republicans to get on board. It requires but it requires 50 votes to get through the Senate. So now, look, that $3.5 trillion package, it fills in a lot of holes of what's left out of this, bipartisan deal. In fact, some of the things it also expands on is human infrastructure. Things like expanded Medicare and including coverage for dental, hearing, and vision in that program. Hey, look, that's good. It's a step forward. It's not Medicare for all. We're not there yet, but we got to keep pushing, and this is a step. Now, there's also, of course, funding for home care for the elderly, as well as children, child care, and, of course, spending on, like I mentioned, climate change, which is the defining issue, all right, of this country. So we need to do both, and it matters that we pass both of these, that the Democrats can pass both of these in tandem. Now, what these corporate Democrats are trying to do is they're saying, no, we don't want to pass them in tandem. We want to pass the bipartisan one first. Now, if that happens, well, then the $3.5 trillion package, that's not gonna happen. Because what happens is that you lose, if you allow that to go forward first, you lose your leverage. Right now, House progressives are saying, no, we're not gonna pass the bipartisan bill unless you do this in tandem. So that's very important, and that's one of their strategies of actually trying to get both of these things passed, right? So there will be, like I said, if they get their way, there will be no leverage on people like Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, Jon Tester, or Mark Warner to support the reconciliation package as is. They're going to block it. Okay. So now it's very important, like I said, that you pass these things both at the same time, or I would rather have them pass the $3.5 trillion package first and get it to Biden's desk, and then they can go and do that $1.1 or $1.2 trillion. So now, what's good to see, and I hope they keep it up, but you've got House progressives that are actually using their leverage and saying, no, we're not going to bow to the demands of this so-called centrist minority, these conservative Democrats, especially when we have most of the House caucus on board. And so right now they're standing their ground. Right now they're using their leverage. In fact, here's a tweet from AOC on Wednesday. She tweeted about this story, quote, conservative, quote, House Democrats, let's stop pretending that Democrats who threaten to tank the president's agenda, kill child care, Medicare expansion, and work with GOP to expand the cruelest parts of our immigration system are moderate. They are not moderate. They're conservative. It was clear from the beginning that the way a skinny bill gets a shot is if it's part of a larger infrastructure package. Voting on the skinny lobbyist-friendly bill first gives conservatives leeway to hurt the larger infrastructure bill with childcare, Medicare, climate, etc. Nope. So again, we've got 9 corporate Democrats. They're wanting to tank Biden's agenda. So now let's get something straight, right? So we have this discussion here a lot about who's a real Democrat, right? Well, Bernie Sanders is not a real Democrat. People like Nina Turner, they're not real Democrats. You think that, first of all, Bernie Sanders literally crafted the $3.5 trillion package. And it didn't include a lot of the things that he wanted to include. But Bernie Sanders, he's a team player, and that matters on Capitol Hill. I know it makes a lot of us progressives frustrated, and I understand that, and I agree with that. Sometimes I'm pretty frustrated as well. But again, there is that reality in Congress where you kind of have to go along in order to get at least some good things through. And this is an example of that. And there are good things that are in this, along with the bad. So that said, right? Who's the real Democrat here? Well, it's not the people who are blocking Biden's agenda, which is not the progressives. It's the so-called centrist Democrats, the conservative Democrats. And they are actually in stated opposition to the majority of the Democratic caucus. Even House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, it's rare that I give her credit on the show, all right? But she says, we're not going to let you hold up the reconciliation bill. I'm actually going to stay here and, I'm going to try to get this caucus in line, right? You go with us, or we're not going to vote on the bipartisan bill at all. All right, so now let me give you some details on that. Pelosi for weeks has made clear that the consensus within her caucus was to hold up the infrastructure bill until the Senate approves the larger Democratic-only bill. A move aimed at pressuring moderate Senate Democrats to back the massive package, but also ease concerns among House progressives that the $1.2 trillion infrastructure didn't go far enough. A senior Democratic aide told CNN that, quote, there are not sufficient votes to pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill this month. This is only 9. There are dozens upon dozens who will vote against the bipartisan infrastructure package unless it's after the Senate passes reconciliation. So understand that right now, the progressives on this issue are actually winning. Isn't that amazing? And I know a lot of us, we don't look at this because it doesn't have things like Medicare for All in it, or, even more climate spending, which again, I'm going to argue is super, super important, and I wish they would go further. But looking at this, they are actually holding their ground on this, and you've got to give them some credit for that, because they could easily have folded to the conservative Democrats. And again, I guess if you're going to be cynical, you could say, well, it's not over yet. I mean, they're taking a month-long vacation. They're going to come back. They're going to vote on this in September, October. And so, anything can happen between in and now. But for right now, it seems like House progressives have been exerting their pressure on the rest of the caucus in order to try to push this larger reconciliation package. And I think that's a good thing. Now, the new letter also comes 2 days after Pelosi reiterated to her caucus on a private call. So this is private Pelosi, all right? She says that there will be no vote in the House on the bipartisan infrastructure bill until the Senate passes reconciliation. That position is in line with the House's progressive Democrats who have threatened to withhold their support for the infrastructure bill unless the reconciliation proposal is approved by the Senate. The speaker said on the call that she is, quote, not freelancing on her position on holding back passing the bipartisan bill until reconciliation is done. That is the consensus. The president has said he's all for the bipartisan approach. Bravo, that's progress, but it ain't the whole vision. So now that's important. And there's another reason here too. And it's because of how popular this is. So this is an incredibly popular. The $3.5 trillion package is actually much more popular than the $1.2 trillion package. In fact, let me give you a poll here. This is from, let's see. Let's get the poll here. It is from Data for Progress. So that's the sort of centrist think tank, right? So they did a poll, and it turns out that not only do most Democrats support the $3.5 trillion, the bigger package, most independents also, and even a majority of Republicans. Well, let me give you the numbers on that, because that's really interesting. So now overall, 2/3, 66% of all voters say they backed a congressional package of the $3.5 trillion plan. Only 26 respondents said that they were opposed to the proposal. Support was particularly high among Democrats, with 85% backing the, and this is important, right? When I put this in the context, it's important because this was crafted by Senate Budget Committee Chairman Bernie Sanders, that $3.5 trillion package. I mean, right away, that it completely blows out of the water all the so-called, Democrats' criticism of Bernie Sanders not being a team player and not being able to get people together to do compromise, blows all that out of the water. So now also, let me give you the Republicans on this. Now, it turns out the survey also found that 47% of GOP voters backed that legislation, and now also to go along with that, about 44% of Republicans said that they were against it. So you even have a massive majority of the country. 66% understand that it would be a super majority. The American people want this. And you've got these corporate Democrats. These legislators that are backed by giant multinational corporations, oil and gas companies, who don't want this infrastructure. They only want the 1.2. They only want the bipartisan because it helps them, and they're against the $3.5 trillion. So that's where those stand. Okay, that's where we stand here. But I just want to say that this is a good example so far of House progressives actually being able to successfully leverage their power. It might actually be successful. Now, we don't know for sure. But $3.5 trillion in new spending, that is not insignificant. If they can do this, now look, mainstream media is going to hail this as the most important thing that's ever happened. Oh my God, the most amazing thing. Look at the bipartisanship. But in reality, it's not, but it's incredibly necessary nonetheless. So, and it should be a stepping stone, of course, to get us to do more and push further. To completely disregard this as progress would be irresponsible. And as irresponsible as saying that this amount of spending and that this bill is the end-all, be-all, and oh my God, I can't believe we've solved all our problems. No, there's nuance here. There's a nuanced position, and that's important to remember. And so I'm hoping that, once again, House progressives continue to press their leverage, and what we need to do is we need to support them in that push and provide them with the backup to help stop these corporate Democrats from being able to put a stop to this, from tanking this entire thing. I'll also add that this is a great test of progressive power in the House. It's really, really important that we actually win this one. And I hope we do. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share with your friends. You can subscribe and help out the channel by becoming a patron. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, or you can become a channel member as well by hitting the join button below.